Hello and welcome to take two of week 9 of Christ in the End of Meaning. We just started there, but my microphone was giving lots of static, so we're going to give it another shot. This is the epilogue of the book where Hesser talks about hope. And in the epilogue, he begins by reminding us of something that he said earlier, which is that this Christological language that he's exploring isn't it's not that it's a technical language or it's a popular language. It's a type of parasitical language. This Christological understanding that he's trying to explore, it uses popular words and it uses technical words, but it expands those meanings. It problematizes those meanings. And so he's kind of saying that there's an inherent difficulty about talking about these ideas. And I think that he's kind of reminding ourselves of this and reminding his reader of this because he's about to try to articulate what hope means from this Christological sense. And it kind of like, it touches on the popular notion of hope, but it also expands that notion. So what he does is, like in previous chapters, very helpfully, he distinguishes hope with inverted commas, which is the popular notion of hope, the religious notion of hope, from this Christological sense. And he shows that by dropping the inverted commas. So he's done that with faith, he's done that with forgiveness, with sin, with all of these other words, with God. He has the popular notion, which is always signified with inverted commas. And then he drops those when he's talking about the kind of Christological understanding of the word. So first of all, he starts with the popular notion of hope. And I'm going to isolate 3 things that I got from reading this chapter. The first thing, very simply, if you think about what hope is, the first thing you can say about hope is it's connected to something that you haven't grasped, that you can't see, that is somewhere kind of ahead of you in the future. So, that you can hope for a cure for Alzheimer's, and you hope for a cure for Alzheimer's because it doesn't exist at the moment. But you can kind of guess that it will exist. You can kind of almost say as well, you go like, I think in the next 20 years, they're going to have a cure for Alzheimer's. So the hope is connected to something that is in the distance. Now, you either can't see it at all, something that's very distant, maybe like a cure for death, right? Or something like that. You go, I think one day we'll be able to, kind of abolish biological death entirely. And that's basically very unseeable. That's probably going to lie, if any, we're way in the future. But a cure for Alzheimer's or a cure for cancer, you can kind of dimly see it. It's something that is in principle seeable, just in factuality, it's not. It's not here. But in principle, it's probably going to arise. So hope is connected to what is unseen in practice. Not what is unseen in principle, but what is unseen in reality. And then the second thing about hope is that it's connected to possibility. You can hope for something that is very probable. You can hope that your hangover disappears before you have to go out in the evening. And you go, well, that's pretty probable because, I feel terrible at 10 o'clock in the morning, but, once I've had a bit of a sleep and had a cup of coffee, everything should be fine. So that's kind of hope for something that is highly likely. Or you might hope for something that is, possible but not probable. So, for example, a cure for Alzheimer's, you might say, well, I hope they have a cure by the time I'm elderly, and maybe that's a threat to me. And that's well, I think that probably is quite probable depending on what age you are. But it's not as probable as getting over your hangover. And then you might hope for something that is highly improbable or impossible. So, you might actually be elderly and having the onset of Alzheimer's, and you're hoping that they'll get a cure in the next 6 months, and that they'll be able to give you that cure, and that's sadly highly unlikely. So hope has a possibility built into it. And you can hope for something that is very probable or hope for something that is very implausible, but there's a percentage connection to it. Something that is, number one, unseen, that is in the future, that you might be able to glimpse kind of like through a fog. And two, there's a probability connected to it. And then three, the simplest, is that with hope there is optimism. You know, hope is what can get you up in the morning, can get you to face the day, can help you to deal with things when life is very difficult and bad. So hope has this positivity, this energy and dynamism built into it. So that's the popular notion of hope in inverted commas. Now, he's going to then compare and contrast this with this Christological idea. And it's not that it's going to be something completely different. That's always been the same throughout the book. He's not saying that these words, you know, the same word means something completely different, because then why would you even use the word? You know, you could say, well, black is dark, is absolute pitch dark color in the popular sense, but in the Christological sense, oh, it's very, very light and very yellow. And why do you use the word black? So it's not that hope is now going to be the opposite. In fact, if anything, this Christological notion of hope that he's talking about is kind of like normal hope, but turned up to 11, right? So we'll take each of them in turn. The first one is hope is connected to what is unseen. So it's connected, that's in the popular sense, it's connected to something that's unseen. But hope in the Christological sense is connected to something that is in principle unseeable. Not something that is contingently unseen, that, you know, in principle can be seen. But hope is connected to something that cannot be seen, can never be seen, will never be seen, to an absolute negation that cannot be grasped. Now, this connects very well to some of the early mystical writings. Anselm. Anselm, he famously constructed an argument for the existence of God that's called the ontological argument. And philosophically speaking, it's actually not an ontological argument. That's something for another time. But he basically said that there are three levels of existence. Something can exist purely in the mind and not in reality. Like a painting, if I'm going to draw something, first of all, I conceive it in my mind. And so that's a level of existence. In a sense, Sherlock Holmes exists or Columbo exists, but it's a very low level of existence. Santa Claus exists in some way as an idea, but not in reality. So that's the first level of existence, something that can exist in the mind, but not in reality. And then Anselm says, and then there's things that can exist in the mind and in reality. So when you actually paint the picture, that painting exists in your mind, but also now exists in reality. And he says that's a better form of existence. It's a better form of existence, not for any particular. It's not like, well, dragons exist in the mind; they don't exist in reality. If dragons existed in reality, that would obviously be a bad thing for us. But it's a higher level of existence. And then finally, he says there's a third level of existence, something that exists in reality, but that cannot be contained in the mind. And it's purely a logical thing. He says, well, there's three levels of existence. And he says that the word God refers to that which exists in reality, but that cannot be contained in the mind. So in other words, God, by definition, cannot be known, cannot be grasped, cannot be, conceptualized or brought into being in some way, not because of some lack, but because of an excess. And so what Anselm does is he's the first in a theological language to describe, maybe not the first, but the first to very systematically do this, to describe something that that cannot in actuality ever be conceptualized. So it's not that one day you will know, one day you will grasp. It's like there in principle can be a reality that is in principle utterly ungraspable. And that, I think, is similar to what Hessert is saying. He says hope attaches itself to something that is inherently mysterious, inherently escapes our grasp, inherently blinds us. And of course, that connects to this whole idea that faith isn't what you see, it's what ruptures our whole way of seeing. It ruptures our whole structures of meaning. It enters the world as the absurd. A conservative Catholic philosopher, Jean-Luc Marion, he uses the example of the burning bush, where that's a paradox. A highly flammable thing in the desert is on fire but doesn't burn up. This is a kind of a ridiculous symbol. And he says it's kind of like whenever the absolute shows up, it always shows up in paradox. It always shows up in a way that defies our understanding, defies our ways of grasping. So for Marion, in a sense, paradox is the kind of the religious experience, the religious revelation. It always comes as something which seems absurd to us. In scientific terms, it's the difference between traditional physics, Newtonian physics, where the universe, there's things that are you don't know. There are things about the universe that we cannot grasp, but in principle we can. If we had enough evidence, if we had enough information, if we had enough time, we could work it out. So the unknown is knowable. It just so happens that we don't know it. But then in quantum mechanics, you have this interesting move where unknowing is folded into the scientific enterprise, where there are some, the double slit experiment, where the wave duality of light, that where there's an inherent unknowability. There is something about the very nature of reality itself that is unknowable, not because we lack information, but actually because we've got so much information, because we've been able to devise sophisticated experiments, and actually this unknowing can be mathematically mapped. So the unknowing becomes part of the scientific enterprise. That's kind of like this idea of hope. Hope is attaching not to an unseen reality that could be seen, but an inherently unseeable reality. And actually, this connects with the word Lord in the book. You'll see there's God in inverted commas, which is the God we can grasp, the God we can talk about, this idol, basically. And then he contrasts that with the capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. Now that's a notation from like translations of the Bible, which every time you see Lord written like that in the Hebrew scriptures, it's the tetragrammaton. It's the 4-letter unsayable name of God that lacks vowels, so it cannot be said. So Lord is a notation for that which cannot be grasped, not in kind of fact, but in principle. Every time you see Lord, it's there as a reminder that what you're kind of referencing is beyond all reference and all ability to grasp. So that's kind of the unseen turned up to 11 in kind of this Christological notion of hope. Then connected to that is the second thing, which is, hope in the popular sense is connected to probability and possibility. But hope in this Christological sense is connected to certainty. What you're hoping for that you cannot see has happened. It has taken place. It has occurred in your life. You can't doubt it. You can't question it. It's what you stand in. It's what you stand upon. The evidence is the very rupture of your paradigm, the very breakdown of your cultural, political, and religious meanings. It has happened. This is an interesting concept because usually we hope for what we don't have, but when we have it, you don't hope for it anymore because you've got it. When you get the cure for cancer, you don't hope for it, you enjoy it, or you're grateful for it, but you don't hope for it because you have it. But in this Christological sense, you hope for what you already have. And this actually is, again, Jean-Luc Marion, who's a philosopher I like. He talks about this where he says, It's kind of like when you love somebody, and they're there with you, and you've, say, been with this person for 20 years. Uh, their knowability, their presence testifies to their unknowability, to all of the stuff you actually don't know about them, that they don't know about themselves. To know somebody is to know that you do not know them. You know certain facts, but it's also to experience their inherent unknowability. And so you can hope for the one that you have. You hope that you learn more about them. So it's like desire. In a popular sense, you think of desire, you desire something you don't have. And then when you get it, you enjoy it. But when you desire someone, you can't desire someone that you don't know, because you don't know them, right? You can't desire a child that hasn't been born. They don't exist. You can desire having a child, but you can't desire that child. But then when the child is born, it's not that you're satisfied, it's that they birth a new desire, and it's a desire for them. And it's a desire that is also fulfilled by their presence. So you're kind of satisfied by them and you desire them. So you're made incomplete by the incoming of someone that you love, a child or a person that you fall in love with. You're rendered incomplete by them. But also, interestingly, the desire is an enjoyable desire. It's a desire that feels, it doesn't feel like a lack. It doesn't feel like pain. It's a desire that's enjoyable. It's a desire that you like. So in a very simple sense, it's like, let's see if this works. Zero is an interesting number, because whenever numbers were invented, you have like hands, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Whenever, but zero is an invention of, it's a very different type of number, because you don't have zero, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So zero is a representation of nothing. It's you put a circle, and that circle represents nothingness. It represents a lack of anything. But as soon as you represent zero, it becomes something that you can count. Slavoj Žižek talks about this very, very brilliantly in terms of lifts in hotels in different parts of the world. In America, and I noticed this when I first came here, it's a bit strange. You go into a lift, and the ground floor is 1, and then the next floor is 2, and the next floor is 3. So there's no notation for zero. But if you go to the UK or Ireland, you get into a lift, and the ground floor is 0. And then the next floor is 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. So 0 is noted. But Žižek was somewhere in Eastern Europe, where he was in a hotel, and he noticed that the lift started with 0, and then 2. The next floor was 2, and then 3, and then 4 and 5. So there was no 1. And he asked the guy in the lift why this was. And the guy said, well, 0, right? The ground floor is 0. You haven't gone anywhere yet, so that's 0. But he says, but as soon as you go to the next floor, you have to count 0, because 0 is marked, so that's 1. And so the first floor is 2. So of course the first floor is 2, right? So that's very mathematically correct. 0, as soon as you mark 0, you're marking something that doesn't exist. This is the same in algebra. In algebra, letters represent what you don't know. They're stand-ins for something that they're a positivizing of something negative. They're a positivizing of something you don't know. So in a very radical sense, hope is connected to an experience that you cannot put into words, you cannot make positive, but that has happened. It's noted. So just as Lord, Lord, it's the positivization of a negativity. It's the noting that something has happened. Now, the mystics again talk about this. They say that we are like a ship sunken in the depths of the ocean. The ocean is in the ship, and the ship is in the ocean. But the ship only contains a fragment of the ocean, while the ocean contains all of the ship. So in other words, this is called a saturated phenomenon, where you're so within something that you can't grasp it. In theological terms, this is the first coming, right? So the sense of that the Christ has already come, right? So the event has happened. We have been ruptured. And that, by definition, creates a second coming, the idea that something is still to come. So there's a famous parable by Blanchard who says that basically these disciples are waiting for the Messiah to return, and they've been praying and waiting, and eventually the Messiah comes down to the city, walks among the people, and some of these disciples recognize the Messiah. They pull him to one side and they say to the Messiah, "We have been waiting and praying for your arrival for years. We have one question for you." The Messiah asks what it is, and one of the disciples says, "When will you return? When will you return?" Now, the idea is it's like someone you love. Their very arrival generates a desire for their arrival. Their very presence, because they cannot be reduced to some object that you can grasp, their very presence testifies to an unknowing. So that's what Hesiod, I think, is arguing. He's saying, right, first of all, this is the hope is connected to something that cannot be grasped, cannot be seen, cannot be rendered into experience or knowledge. Secondly, it's not possible, it's not probable, it's not implausible, it's happened. The evidence is that you have been ruptured, that you have been torn asunder, and you positivize it. You kind of like you try to find words to describe it. You try to notate it, just like a zero notates a nothingness. But the notation doesn't grasp the nothingness; it just marks it. Right? It's just, in economics, debt is the positivization of a negativity. To have no money is different from having debt. Debt is the positivization of a lack. In a very bad way. So Hesiod is saying there's something about saying when you're hoping for something that cannot be seen, but that has already occurred, but cannot be grasped. And then thirdly, hope is positive. Hope is what generates, action, what gets you out of bed, what makes you feel that you can carry the burdens that you're having to carry. It doesn't take them away, but it helps you be able to face those things. And it helps you able to face those things in a much more radical way because, again, it's like turned up to 11. It's not that you're hoping for a cure for Alzheimer's and you don't know if it's going to happen or not. And so you're optimistic, but you're also a bit scared. Hesiod is saying, but you feel this positivity about something that's already happened, something that's occurred in your life that you cannot grasp. So in one sense, it cannot be seen, but that you stand within, that you feel caught up in, that cannot be spoken, but that contains and holds you. So that's it in a nutshell, I think, is what he's describing hope as. It's very close, I think, to the mystical notions where they positivize negativity. Mystery is something that is a name for something that cannot be grasped. But it's like we live in the mystery, we live in the complexity, we live in the unknowing. And it's something that has happened because you can't deny it. Something has happened in your life, or a series of things have happened that have really brought home to you that you're relating to something that is ungraspable and unknowable. But it's mysticism turned up, because sometimes you hear mystics and you think that what they're saying is, well, we don't know now. Whenever we talk about the unnameable God, the tetragrammaton, we have this sense of, well, we don't have the mind of God, but one day we will. But for someone like Anselm, no. The true mystic is the one who says no, that there is something inherently unknowable and unsayable that we are connected to. And the word hope is what describes it. You have hope in it. It's unseen, but it's certain. And it gives you energy and strength to live. Okay. I think that's kind of it. It's a very short chapter, something like 4 or 5 pages. So let's hand over to you guys. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or want to ask anything of clarification? Let's go for it.
Hey Pete.
Yep.
Okay, you initially said that he talks about hope being not out of what we don't have, but what we have.
Yeah.
How does that connect with the concept that you talked about? Der, was it Derrida's um, uh, messianic call within certain things that we have? Are those? Does it need to be manifested or tied in like to something material or an idea, or are those two thing concepts kind of his hope and Derrida synonymous? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a big debate between Derrida and Jean-Luc Marion. Marion was a student of Derrida's, and the debate centered on this. Derrida was Jewish, and so and his notion of the messianic was, there is a lack, there is something that we long for that we can never grasp, that is always still to arrive. And then Jean-Luc Marion, who's a Catholic, he he said, well, no, you can long for something that has happened, which is a very Christian notion in the sense of like the first coming has happened, it's occurred. Um, and and so the debate, what Marion was always trying to do, and he's got a book called God Without Being, where he tries to argue that you can desire and hope for, long for, and yearn for what already has occurred. And he calls it a saturated phenomenon. And that is closer, I think, to what Hessert is saying. Now, I did my PhD, well, I did my master's thesis actually on that debate, and it was very influential in terms of the development of my work in icon. And at first, I was more drawn to Jean-Luc Marion, and then got more drawn into Derrida. But yeah, if anything, I Hessert is wanting to say not that, yeah, we're longing for something that is to come. So it's not like, I think it's different from Derrida's messianic. Um, Hessert wants to say that the Christian claim is that we are within something has occurred, that the experience of revelation is a saturated phenomenon. It's like looking at a movie screen from 2 inches away. It's just, there's too much to grasp. And I don't think, like, Marion is quite conservative, so he means that in a very literal way, that Hessert, I think, is just arguing for a structure. He says, like, when you say you hope from this perspective, you're saying that you have experienced this occurrence, this rupture, this breakdown, and you can't grasp it because by definition it's that which breaks the grasp of everything. But you're standing in that site, the site of the eruption, and you are positively inclined to that eruption. So in that way, I think it's different from Derrida. But do you have any thoughts on that, or?
No, that's helpful. I guess what I'm trying to decipher is how this plays out practically, um, like engaging in, hmm, like almost like if you have an idea, like if you're in a trade profession or something like that, then you're engaging in the uh, you can hope to be better at your trade, uh, but you can or it materially you can study, you can it, you can do all the things that will become better at your trade.
Yeah.
Is that what is he saying? A similar thing with that?
He would, but so he would say that's kind of like the popular notion of hope,
Okay.
which he's not against, of course, because that's how we live every day, and that's
Right.
the thing I have to keep reminding myself of as well. It's like when he's making the distinction, it's not like one's bad, one's good. He's like, yeah, no,
Mm.
in everyday hope, that's how it works. But his notion of what Christological hope is like is more like looking at a painting, and you look at a painting, like a painting that you love, and you can't grasp it all because every time you come back to it, you'll see something else, you'll experience something else, you'll read it differently. But so the painting is drawing you into itself. It's so full of meaning that you can't grasp it, but you have the painting. You maybe have a picture of it or whatever, but weirdly, you actually have the thing that is making you desire. And I think that's important for Hessert, because the normal everyday type of hope is that, yeah, you hope that you become a better, carpenter, but that always means that, in a sense, you're dissatisfied with where you currently are. But this type of hope that Hessert's talking about is weirdly where you have, like, the person that you love, you're with them. So you're kind of satisfied, but you're also dissatisfied, but not in a negative way. You're dissatisfied because their very presence, part of their very presence reminds you that they're also, someone that you don't know, someone who is a universe that you cannot grasp. And that, so that's, it's like there's the hope of what you don't have, and there's the hope of what you do have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, and you start to enjoy, have a form of joy in the what you don't have.
Exactly. And I think that's the difference. That's what at least Hessert and Marion are trying to say, is that this is a hope that is robbed of a sting of dissatisfaction, or a negative dissatisfaction, all of that stuff about the ideal, and you don't reach it. This is a weird type of enjoyable dissatisfaction in what you have.
And
But
is that enjoyable? Does that connect it to a desire that opens up new worlds that paradoxically makes you, you know, gives you growth and development, almost like instead of a self-help book, that's the popular notion. This enjoyment of your lack, or who you are, the mystery, I guess you could say, uh, leads you to finding new worlds, uh, a depth in your work that makes you, lack for a better word, better and more interesting. Maybe.
yeah, yeah, I think that's the case, but but we have to, work out why does that follow? Because
Okay.
somebody might want to say, well, this actually is the opposite of this, which I think you're implying is
Hmm.
somebody could read this as like, okay, so you just realize I don't know, and so you just kind of sit down and do nothing,
Hmm.
and um, I think it's potentially a legitimate critique of this, and if you listen to this and you go, right, okay, so this is a type of hope that says that you're relating to something inherently unknowable. But here's the thing that I have to remember, is that Hessert's only talking about, um, he's talking about, in a sense, the ground of being. He's not talking about obviously everyday knowledge. Like, we'll never know how to build a bridge. Like, we'll never work it out, right? And people are like that. Some people say, whenever trains first came out, they're like, no, we'll never be able to go more than 20 miles an hour. Give it up. Or there's people definitely who go like, these things don't even try to understand the universe, because we'll never be able to do it. But Hessert's going, no, 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 that's all in the natural world. That's great. But the ground of being is inherently unknowable. And that's what that's what we're talking about. It's
Right.
what connects us with ontologically, or what connects us with the source of the universe. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah, but then again, I guess he would also then want to say, and like Meister Eckhart says this, when Meister Eckhart talks about the Godhead, he is talking about the unnameable, unknowable source. But Meister Eckhart says the unnameable is omni-nameable. So actually, the fact that you can't speak about love is what generates so much poetry about love. So again, I guess in a way, someone like definitely like Meister Eckhart wants to say that this inherent unknowability is actually what generates poetry. Is what generates a type of a new type of discourse that's not scientific. That's something else.
Right. Thank you. That's helpful.
Anyone else got a burning question or thought, comment? I'm wondering, by the way. Go ahead. Yep.
I'm just going to add that I'm looking forward to now going back to the beginning of this book and starting it all over again now after all these weeks and discussions and reminiscings and processings and just kind of like knowing how it ends. I'm looking forward to going back to all that stuff at the beginning that seemed to just like completely throw us into sort of a ruptured state, as you said. So thought you
Yeah.
ought to know that.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I was feeling so like by the time I got to here, I'm noticing, for example, oh, there's these like he's got a very systematic method. I mean, his thing of like he starts off with faith in inverted commas, and then he explains the popular notion of faith, and then he drops the inverted commas and he looks at faith from the Christological perspective. And there's things like that that you only kind of notice at the very end of the book, and then you're going like, oh crap! If I'd known that at the beginning, this will make it a lot easier to read. These kind of like little techniques that he uses. So yeah, I think it would be for anybody who wants to. I think it would be a great to return to it a second time. Like I as well, I find this epilogue a little bit. I find it that he was really struggling to actually define what hope was. So I don't know. I hope I did it justice. I hopefully I said it more clearly than he did. But did anybody else like find it like this notion of hope difficult, or have I clarified it? Or do you think I've done an injustice to what he's saying? I always kind of fear that I'm doing that.
For me, Pete, it's going to be one of those things. Knowing what he said at the epilogue, when I go back and reread the book again, I'll have that in mind. I think it'll become much more clearer than it seemed to be as I read it, and even as you've explained it. It's like, okay, I think I get the general sense, but now knowing the whole faith in Christ crucified and resurrection and all these concepts, both in and out of quotation marks, I believe they will allow me to get a better sense of this idea of hope that I think he's trying to articulate there in the epilogue.
Yeah, 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 and sometimes maybe like I wonder if you could put the whole book into a tweet, which is that mystery in inverted commas is something that we will one day be able to penetrate, but theology at its best brings us into the heart of a mystery that is impenetrable by definition. I want like it's too simple to say that's, but I think that's almost like I think constantly what's being said here is he's saying that actually what this Christological experience is doing is it's bringing us into a type of life that stops us from basically saying that we understand the totality, that we can understand the world, but actually understanding the very core of existence is impenetrable. And the experience of Christ crucified is the experience of really affirming that, enjoying that, and living in the light of that. And the big thing for me is mystery in its popular notion is, of course, we will one day be able to know. The opposite is not, oh yeah, hey, we'll never know. We'll never know why there are black holes. We'll never know this. No. It's like quantum mechanics. I mean, I've used that analogy a few times, but I think it's an appropriate one because there'll be a more appropriate one in 20 years. But really, a lot of the insights of contemporary physicists are that undecidability and superpositioning and all of this crazy stuff is actually part of scientific knowledge. That you actually have been able to fold unknowing into knowing. The unknown is, in a sense, the unknown within the known. And basically in psychoanalysis, that's called the unconscious. The unconscious is that part of us that we can never penetrate with language, but that influences us and that affects us. And there's types of language we can use to help us understand it. But ultimately the unconscious is, in a sense, that which defies language. So it's not just theology that has this, psychoanalysis has it. And other disciplines have, love. Love is, the poets talk about basically the unknowability of love, but that in a sense poetry can help us glimpse it.
Hey, Pete.
Jemima, you have something interesting to say. Oh yeah, who's that? Who are you? Who's this?
David.
Hey, David.
So how does this tie into Jack Caputo's Hoping Against Hope? Because as I was reading the final chapter, I was thinking I need to go back and reread that too, because that helped. Jack's book helped me go through that chapter somewhat.
Yes, and it's very close, and I love Jack Caputo's work on. I love that book. I think I wrote the foreword to it, didn't I? Hoping Against Hope. I think it was the Hoping Against Hope. My mind's not as good as it used to be. I would say this, that where a potential difference is, and I'm not sure. Like I haven't thought about it enough to really kind of like parse it out. But Catherine Sarah Moody, who's a really, really good academic in the UK, and wrote a fantastic book on radical theology in the emerging church. And she like looks at my work very deeply and, you know, critiques it. But she did a paper at a conference I heard, and she basically said that there's still too much hoping for the future in someone like John Caputo and Derrida. There's still this kind of like, it never comes, it never arrives, but you're always kind of like wanting the utopia without ever getting there. And Catherine Sarah Moody says, no, to get to the religious notion of hope, you have to be more hopeless. You have to get rid of even that. And I think that if there's a difference, and I'm not sure if there is, because I love that book, but if there's a difference between Hessert and Caputo, Hessert might be saying that in one sense, his hope is more hopeless. Like you don't have any, when it comes to the ground of being, the hope comes from what is, not from what isn't. But by the way, I'm thinking off the top of my head, and as I say that, Caputo is not going to disagree with that, because for Caputo, he's talking about politics and culture and all of that, where we can imagine, you know, changes, and we can in science progress. Hessert is talking about, all he's talking about is how we relate to the ground of being, how we relate to the fundamental ground of existence. I don't think Hesser's not saying that this type of hope should permeate out to other areas. I don't know if that made any sense at all. I'm literally thinking off the top of my head. So my short answer is, yeah, I think they're very close. Like, but I think maybe they're talking about something slightly different. Caputo, when he says hoping against hope, he's kind of going like, it's like hoping that your kid will go to university. You have to work to do it. You have to, you know, make sure they go to school, you read to them, you save up money. That's a hoping against hope. It's not you sit back and go, I'm sure it'll happen. Like, it's like you have to put your shoulder to the wheel and you have to work for it. And I think that's what Caputo's talking about. And then, but Hessert, in this book, he's talking about what it means to affirm, what it means to experience, what does the Christian experience mean? And ultimately, it is a sense that you are caught up in something that is utterly beyond any easy categorization. So maybe they're just talking about two slightly different things. I don't know. I'd have to think. What do you think? You tell me.
Well, the practical application for me right now, just as I'm sitting here in this hurricane, is exactly what you just said. Yeah, but I'm totally out of control. We've prepared. I could find my home. I could find my home shattered. And rather than living in that, what I'll call that false hope, or the hope in the quotes, would be, that is what it is. I am living now in that reality, which is why this work and your work has really helped me through not only this hurricane season, but also the whole political season, which is a hurricane of its own.
Yeah.
So thank you. But exactly that, I mean, that's how I am sitting in this storm right now. Just as I'm here, the power flickered a little bit, and I was like, oh, okay, because we're expecting to lose power. We're hoping we don't, but that's where we are. So anyway, thank you.
It was crazy, yeah. Wow, wow. I remember I was in New Jersey a few years ago, and there was a big storm, and we got caught in it, and the power went out. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't anywhere near as bad as what's happening in Florida, but I remember we had like 3 days of kind of sitting in this darkened house. It was actually quite a cool experience because we weren't in any big threat, but the power went out. You couldn't leave the house. There's trees everywhere, and it was a crazy experience. So. Very good. But yeah. So when Hessert says, or the Bible says, hope in the Lord. I think that's a Bible verse, hope in the Lord. Hessert is saying that, in one sense, translate that as feel confident and comfortable in the absolute hurricane of being itself. Not the contingent stuff like real hurricanes or whatever, but in to use the analogy of like there's something about the universe that has chaos built into its heart, and to hope is to kind of like, in a sense, think that is something that can generate good things. You think that you're energized by actually not running from that chaos and trying to build up walls against it, and try to have religious ideologies that protect you against it, that try to name everything and say you are okay. But that, in one sense, faith weirdly is about saying we're in the eye of the storm, because that's part of the very nature of the universe itself. And my religion doesn't hide me from that. It helps me dwell there, and it helps me actually kind of even kind of find something powerful and energetic and optimistic about that. So yeah, that's hope, which is very different from when we hear hope in the Lord. Always sounds like, oh yeah, hope that God will kind of like make everything good. But this is like, no, hope in the Lord means I embrace the mystery of existence.
Hey, Peter. Oops, sorry.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. This is Janet. I was just saying, I noticed on the very last page, I think he just makes a very brief sentence that ties this all together, where he says the testimony of the soul to the reality of hope is not in words about the self's condition, but about Christ crucified.
Yeah. So what unpack that for me. Whereabouts is it, by the way? Did you say in the last?
Yeah, it's the last page, 232. Yep. And it's the third from the last paragraph at the very end of that paragraph. The paragraph that starts with hope. It says in a similar way, the testimony of the soul
to the reality
of hope is not in words about the self-condition, but about Christ crucified. So when you unpack Christ crucified, I was just confirming what you were saying. To me, that sentence sort of just sums it all up, what you were just saying, that Christ crucified, embracing the lack, having confidence in that, sitting in that.
And I love all these words have become so rich with meaning. Soul, the testimony of the soul. So like last week we looked at his notion of soul, which is so deep and powerful. The reality of hope, and Christ crucified. I mean, it's almost difficult now if you want to talk about these in a religious format now. These words have such deep resonance by the time you get to the end of this book. Yeah. And who was the other voice that I heard?
It's Rodney. I could just jump on what she was just saying there because, first I wanted to say that this was one of the more difficult chapters in the book for me. And I thought you did excellent at explaining it. It helped a lot. Although I still think I'm going to have to, meditate on it for a while to try to grasp it. But what she just said about Christ crucified, I think brings up the point again that Paul Hessert has tried to make throughout the book, and that is we have to start with Christ crucified. Yeah. Otherwise, all these things become confusing again. It's like trying to understand hope when you're still living according to a life of power and meaning. It doesn't make any sense, because when I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm hoping for peace, well, then I would think that there's going to be some conflict that's going to be resolved. And if I see signs that it might be resolved, oh, I have hope for peace.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, the peace I give you is not of this world. So then it goes back to that whole structure of meaning. So hope that is not of this world, or hope that is just in this life, is hope that is connected to a life of power and meaning and understanding. And I think that if we begin doing, because he mentions, I think at the very beginning too, that on 230, that faith and hope are virtually interchangeable. So they do the same thing. It's like a choice to live without power and meaning. And as somebody embraces Christ crucified, as they embrace that, they're letting go of that hope that is attached to that. They're letting go of that, sign that shows me that I'm going to grasp my hope. They're not looking for that. So it's like a hope that is unseen, but you really can't even, like what you were trying to explain, you can't even really talk about it. It's because it's not seen. There's no sign I can point to confirm that hope.
Yes.
It's that Abba, that trust that he was saying. It's like, okay, my God, why have you forsaken me? And yet in the middle of that, he's crying Abba, which speaks of that relationship of trust.
Yeah. No, as you're talking, you're making me think that, I think one way you could understand this book is that it's not trying to help you have this experience of Christ crucified. It's almost trying to protect you from it's trying to help you remain faithful to it. Because almost like in my own conversion, I feel like I had this experience of this subtraction of my investment, my libidinal investment in the world. I felt momentarily that I was broken free of the ideal, guilt, all of that. But then I entered a church, and I kind of gradually restructured that entire frame. I just put different things in it. I slotted different ideals in. And so what happened was, I think I was betraying. It wasn't really the fault of other people. It's this tendency, it's this temptation to experience the mystery and the subtraction, and then to think that it's contingent, and then to try to build a new fortress. And this book for me is part of, I think, what I'm trying to do with parotheology, actually, which is to go, how do we remain faithful to that subtraction? And what I love about this book is, I feel like when you were talking, oh yeah, this book is about trying to go, don't rebuild, don't think that, oh, now I've pulled apart, now I have to find new ideals, now I have to reconstruct, now I have to. It's like, no, all of these positive theological terms actually refer to protection from that. They're all faith, hope, and love. They're at their best, they're trying to prevent you from basically going away from that fundamental experience of Christ crucified. So yeah, I think that's one way of thinking about it. Is why is he writing this book? He's saying, you've had the experience, right? So you've had the experience of Christ crucified somewhere in your life. Don't remain faithful to that. Remain faithful to that, and don't render the mystery contingent. Don't render the hope into something that's temporarily 2 years or 5 years down the line. Don't kind of like fall back into the traps. Remain faithful to Christ crucified, which means remain faithful to that experience of freedom you had when your world fell apart.
Excellent. Yeah, I want to piggyback on that, because I had another question, and it seemed like you were addressing it, but I'm not sure. It might have been something different, but I posted this on the Facebook page also. But the question was, as I was going through the book again, it seemed like there was a distinction between faith, even as defined by Paul, as the the willingness to live apart from power and meaning. So faith and faithing Christ crucified, like a distinction there. And possibly, like, okay, we talked about people hitting rock bottom or having these experiences, or even people just acting in faith where he would turn and see someone and go, oh, wow, what great faith. And he would recognize that faith, but possibly not meaning that they had yet embraced Christ crucified. It's like, okay, they were acting in that situation by faith, meaning they were stepping outside of the structure of power and meaning. And so there was a recognition of that. But then there was like, okay, now come and follow me. Like, come, like, continue, like, pick up your cross and walk in that. That's where life is. So it seems like there is a distinction between hitting that place, coming to the place where you lose control, and then going right back into a structure of meaning, or embracing Christ crucified. It's like, here's an opportunity to walk free of it. So he's telling the woman caught in adultery, it's like, okay, do you see now? There is no condemnation in the kingdom. That's all in the structure of power and meaning. There is no condemnation here. Now that you see that, go and live in that. Go and live. So go and pick up your cross, go and walk free of it. So it seemed like there was a distinction. I don't know if I'm making that or if you think that's accurate. What do you think?
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and it seems like what you originally said made me think of that, and then you say that because of what I said. Because I'm like, the thing is about fidelity to this experience, which is, in one sense, the best reason why someone might wear a cross. In this, it's not right why people wear crosses, but it's to say, I want to remain within Christ crucified. That you pick up your cross and you walk with it, which is a way of saying it's not just that happens and then you reconstruct another system of power and meaning, which I felt that I did with my conversion. Was like a brief moment between, let's call it like a secular structure of meaning and a sacred structure of meaning. And this conversion was actually this brief kind of like oscillation, this brief moment between these two structures. And so what in my 20s I began to try to do was to go, what would it mean to have an institution that tried to help us remain faithful to and walk within that space between secular forms of meaning and sacred forms of meaning? And so Christ crucified for me is like the notation of nothing. In the same way that someone invented zero and they make a notation for that represents nothing, Christ crucified is in a sense a theological term for a notation, a positivity of this rupture. And picking up your cross and following Christ is in a sense remaining true to the rupture that is Christ crucified. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because I think it's just to say that when anyone goes through a traumatic event, that, that's your faith in Christ crucified. I don't think so. I think that is an opening of faith. You know what I mean? It's like a break. It's a traumatic break, so you break. And so it's like that gives you an opportunity to either continue on that path, or we restructure, we start grasping for that security again, because it was traumatic. And most of us don't want to live in that. And so,
absolutely. And I wonder, this is what I mean by transformance art. By transformance art, I mean a series of liturgical practices that help to keep this fluid, that don't reify and ossify a new form of meaning. And the closest, I think, thing there is to it is in psychoanalysis is a practice that is designed to destabilize you. It's designed to, and eventually, in a sense, you internalize that destabilization, hopefully in a positive way. But that's my worry. Is that do we have an institution that basically, yeah, helps you get over the trauma of the loss of meaning in Christ? Does it help you construct around that? Or can we have a set of practices, music and sermons and poetry and comedy and all that? Can we have a set of practices that actually help to keep this experience molten, liquid, to keep it kind of like to keep it from becoming rock again? That's what I think is the role of the church at its best. And I don't think we do it very well, but mostly because all of us are scared of it. You know, it's not that you can't blame churches for that, but the real courage is to have a set of practices that keep it molten. And I think that's the very reason why we're doing this book study. Is this book, I think, is an attempt to go, don't lose that experience, remain true to it. Anybody else want to throw in any thoughts or ideas? This is our very last session, so speak now or forever hold your peace.
Hey, Pete.
Hey.
I am involved in a ministry that is to a congregation that's very much older, and so I've done a lot of funerals and grief work, and what I've noticed in visiting people who are going at various stages in the grief process is that death opens up this absence, and grief is their connection to this absence. And at some point, a shift happens where they begin to, in a way, enjoy grief as their connection to the one who is gone. So that hope is not sort of the painkiller or the anesthetic to grief, but hope is that grief that's beginning to change form. And when I preach on Easter, on the resurrection, that's like my least favorite Sunday, because I don't believe, it's hard to even believe what I'm saying, but I believe it when I see it in a widow.
Yeah.
Whose grief is transforming into hope. I don't know if that's what.
I think there's a guy, I think Thomas Altizer wrote a book called Living the Death of God. But this idea that actually resurrection is living the death of Christ. Weirdly, the resurrection is living the crucifixion. It's affirming, it's weirdly, you say almost turning the mourning and the loss into something productive and powerful. So I think that's a great way of thinking about it. When we don't mourn, we try to repress and forget, and then it comes up in other ways. So when you mourn, you can remember. Mourning is the process of actually connecting with the other. When you don't mourn, what people repress, push it down, try to forget. It's forgotten but not gone. All right. Any final thoughts? Give it a couple more seconds because people are still jumping in. So I don't want to stop until we're all happy in our unhappiness. Okay, guys, listen, I'll tell you what, thank you. I hope I'm so glad I got to share this book with you. So I'm saying thank you to you, but you should be saying thank you to me if you enjoyed this, because if without me, you would never have heard of this. So there you go. I'm going to have a drink and pat myself on the back for introducing you to this book. I want to introduce it to more and more people. In fact, I'm tempted to try to find a way to get it republished and to write a foreword for it, just to encourage other people to read it. But I do really appreciate that you've been part of this. You've been supporting me through doing this. So that is very, you allow me to do what I do. I can't believe that I get to read books like this and talk about them and do all of that. And it's because of your support and your help. So thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll keep the Facebook group open for conversations and comments and ideas. And if you want to keep on this journey with me, then, I will be looking at other books to do and other discussions and stuff like that. So if you've got any suggestions, please do let me know. Stick them on the Facebook group as well. So for now, that's me. If you're in Belfast, by the way, if you're in Northern Ireland, I'm going to do a live Pyroth seminar in Belfast in October. So come along to that. I'll be putting out details later in the week. But other than that, I will see you hopefully online again soon. Take care of yourselves.